Welcome to the Grazing Grass Podcast, episode 12, where we talk to Jake Takiff of Cedar Springs Farms.
My number one recommendation to somebody getting into this now is to find a mentor. Find many mentors. Go work on their farms. Immerse yourself in it.
You're listening to the Grazing Grass Podcast, helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. On today's interview, we have Jake Takiff. Jake and his family operate Cedar Springs Farm. And on today's episode, we discuss swales, trees, cattle, and hogs. Before we get to today's conversation, if you've not subscribed to our podcast, please subscribe. Also, share this episode with someone you think might find it interesting. Also, leave us a review wherever you listen to our podcast. Jake, we're glad to have you on the Grazing Grass podcast and to hear about your grazing story.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation?
Yeah, I live with my family on 40 acres in Hotchkiss, Colorado. We got onto that land about 4 years ago and have really prioritized rotational grazing and other regenerative methods to rehabilitate a lot of the soil, a lot of the areas of the farm that have been for many decades overgrazed and maybe not been taken care of as best they could have. We're utilizing livestock and perennials to really promote healthy soil and a healthy ecosystem, and
Yes.
using that process to create viable products we can sell, bring to market.
Oh, yes. Yes. Is this land that you just recently purchased? Did you grow up on a farm? How did you get there for your grazing?
So we purchased it in 2017, and it's the first farm I've actually owned outright. I've always farmed on leased land. I didn't grow up in a farming family, but early in life I started working on farms and had some really amazing mentors who taught me a lot early on. And then since then, I've always made a living wherever I go by either leasing land and raising animals or working on neighboring farms.
Tell us a little bit more about where you are in Colorado, about your climate and your rainfall in the area.
So we live in what's considered to be a high desert at 6,400 feet elevation, receiving 10 inches, sometimes less of rainfall a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and most of it's during a certain time of year, so there's actually long stretches throughout the year where we don't get any precipitation at all. And so the real key for us is how to manage our water, stretch out that water to keep the forage growing, keep our animals grazing, and keep the landscape healthy.
Yes, 10 inches of water's not very much to work with, but it's always good to have challenges.
Yeah, it's been challenging, and we're lucky. Yeah.
What kind of forages do you have?
So we're lucky to have quite a few perennial and annual grasses and legumes already established on the farm, but a lot of areas were really overrun with thistle, knapweed, a lot of other really gnarly weeds that the cattle wouldn't eat. So
Oh, yes.
we've spent time really focusing on moving the water across our landscape. We use swales, we use ditches, we use any method we can to just spread that water out and soak it into our landscape, and then graze our animals through that system. And we've really seen a lot of the grasses and legumes now taking over and actually dominating over the weeds. In most areas, there's still some areas we got a lot of work to go on, but we are seeing a difference.
Very good. Very good. Now, your swales and your ditches, do you have some natural ponds? And then are you watering from those swales or ditches, or how are you doing watering for your animals?
So we have a couple of springs on the property that are very productive, and the springs, when they have enough flow and they allow for us to, we'll use that water to flood them into the swales and irrigate the trees. That also sub-irrigates the pasture below.
Okay.
So we do notice that by flooding out a swale, we actually hit a pretty large surface area of the ground and have seen a lot more vegetation and greenery. And the springs overflow into a series of ponds that we built, and those ponds are where we'll drink the cattle out of. And it's also, we've stocked them with trout and allowed some really abundant riparian zones to develop around the ponds. We're really particular about how we bring livestock to ponds to drink. We don't want to damage that ecosystem.
Yes.
So we have a lot of wildlife and a lot of really beautiful riparian zones on the farm now.
Oh, very nice. So, how are you bringing cows to the pond?
We've opted for bringing the cows in always from the uphill side. So the downhill side of the pond has a dam that's actually
Okay.
holding the pond in place. So for one thing, we leave that whole downhill side alone. We don't want those heavy hooves in that area. And we try to actually bring the cattle in a way that they're actually not drinking out of the pond itself, but out of these slight waterways that, like veins that come off of the pond. And those veins actually move the water away from the pond at a 1% grade. And what that does, it actually keeps any manure or urine from the livestock that hits the ground and runs off into that water. None of it actually goes into the pond. It's kind of trajected across the landscape, actually onto the trees and onto the pasture, where it's used as fertilizer instead of contaminating our water source.
Oh, very good. Very good. You mentioned your trees. I think I saw on Instagram you all have planted a lot of trees. What species and what are you trying to do with your trees?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've been trialing with the trees right now because with our amount of rainfall and also our type of soil, which is very alkaline, a little bit salty, and pretty poor in most areas, it's been a real experiment to get tree cover established on our farm. Uh, our goal with the trees is to create windbreak for the farm, shade for the animals, fodder for the animals from coppice trees, as well as fruit, nuts, and berries, mostly for the livestock. We're not really trying to create a commercial orchard or a monoculture of any type of nut, fruit, or berry. We're instead trying to create an ecosystem and let it be self-sufficient once it's established. So our feed bill will actually be cut down to nothing because the pigs will be foraging for these crops on their own, and the cattle will enjoy the shade. And just the effect of having trees in the high desert, it works like a swamp cooler. It the moisture that those trees hold, and
Oh, yes.
when the sun hits those trees and wicks away that moisture, it creates a cool, shady environment where the livestock are comfortable and people are comfortable too.
So what are you doing to get that established so your livestock doesn't hurt your tree saplings?
So our tree plantings are all planted on the swales. So if you can imagine, what swales look like from above is a topographical map. You actually, because they're on contour, you actually see the lines moving across the landscape.
Okay.
So the trees are planted on those swales. Those swales are 30 to 60 feet apart from each other, depending on where it's flatter, the swales move farther apart. Where it's steeper, the swales come closer together. So it creates a meandering alley. So we use portable electric fencing and we run the cows and the pigs in between those alleyways. So it defines our rotational grazing pattern. So the swales are actually the fence lines that we use.
Oh, okay.
So we have about, I would say at this point, probably 12,000 feet of swales moving across our landscape, and maybe even more. And those become our portable fence lines. And when the animals have grazed one alley, we move them down to the next alley to graze. And we move them through the entire system. And when they've grazed through it, we start them back at the top and start over.
About how long does it take you to move your animals all the way through the system and start back over?
We make it through the whole system twice a year. So by the time that the animals have made it through
Oh,
once, so we
okay.
start them in the spring when the grass is coming up. By midsummer, they've made it through the whole system and start back at the top, and then work their way back through again, and they're finished right around the time they'd start eating hay.
Oh, yes.
What's great about it is it's actually putting all that fertility on those alleys, and when it does rain and that manure runs off the field, it's running off into the swale below and onto the root system of the tree. So those trees are actually getting a lot of fertility from those ruminants.
Oh, yes, they would. Now, on the swales, is there always water standing, or is there water in there sometimes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's water in them when we have a rain or snow event. If the snow melts really fast, you'll see all the swales have water in them, but it's not necessarily standing. All the swales are engineered at a 1% grade. So the water actually moves slowly across the landscape. It's not moving at a speed that's erosive. It's moving at a very slow, gradual rate. And so it soaks into the ground and it's not disturbing the soil. And it's a really lovely method because that way the trees don't get their feet too wet. The water moves over them, but it's not standing and getting
Yes.
stagnant and causing root rot. And we found that in some areas we get more water in the swales, in some areas they stay dry more often. And so we've had to really tailor what tree species go in what areas. Some trees need a lot more water, some of them actually like it drier. And we're growing everything from riparian trees
Yes.
like poplars and willows and walnuts and things that want a lot of water, all the way to pinyon and Siberian pea shrub and Russian mulberry, things that really don't want any water on them. So we've tailored our plantings to the landscape, noticed what areas are wet, what areas stay dry, and then we plant accordingly.
Oh, okay. Very good. And were the swales in place when you purchased the land, or is that something you added?
They were not. We got the land. There was nothing there except there's an old mobile home and a barn, and no earthworks, no ponds. So it's really been a lot of work these past 4 years. We engineered and dug all the swales
Oh, yes.
ourselves. We also we've remodeled the barn and made it a usable space. We've we got the place for a very affordable price and have put in a lot of work to make it into something really special and really beautiful. We've planted at this point over 10,000 trees, and at this point we're just watching the landscape begin to mature and grow into what our vision is for it.
Oh, yes. Your landscape's so very young with those trees and having just completed this in the last 4 years.
Yeah, it's a really young system still.
You mentioned livestock. You have what kind of species do you have for livestock?
So right now we're focused on cattle, hogs, and poultry. And we've experimented with lots of other livestock. And I've in previous farms that I've run all types of livestock. But what it comes down to is that cattle, hogs, and poultry are the easiest to fence and the most profitable animals that I've found for the farm. They're good for the land if you manage them properly, and they're actually going to pay your bills. You don't have to sell. You don't have to explain to people what grass-fed beef is. Grass-fed beef is hot. People want it. Pastured pork is hot. People want it. You're
Yes.
not trying to sell a product that you have to explain what it is. So we're really focused on heritage breeds, on grass-fed genetics, on animals that are incredibly hardy. We don't like animals you have to baby and put a lot of energy into. We don't like pulling calves or anything like that. We've settled on varieties of
Yes.
livestock that are incredibly self-sufficient and incredibly delicious, and also adapted to our particular landscape.
Very good. What breeds are you using?
For cattle, we're pretty settled on the belted Galloway as our herd of mother cows as mamas. They're incredibly tough animals. We've never had a calving issue, and the belted Galloway is incredibly delicious animal, beautiful marbled meat on pasture. You never need to give them grain to achieve a marble. They'll have a marble just on a grass-fed diet. And we run a Devon bull, a red
Oh,
Devon,
very nice.
another beautiful heritage breed. And what we like about the Devon, it just adds more size to the cuts. People like seeing a big old ribeye, and the belted Galloway can be a little smaller framed. And so we find breeding them to the Devon bull,
Oh,
which
yes.
doesn't take away from flavor at all, doesn't take away from any of those good grass-fed genetics. It actually adds a little bit of size to the cuts, and our cattle will finish a little faster on a grass-fed diet. So right now we're running belted Galloway cows and a red Devon bull, and the offspring are getting raised for slaughter. And then as far as pigs go, we've experimented with a lot of breeds, everything from coonies and those little grazing hogs, and we've been through that whole phase. We've also tried some of the bigger pigs, and I've raised Yorkshires and Durocs, and then all those big, nasty, lean pigs that just don't do great on pasture. And what we've really settled on is the Gloucester Old Spot. It's a heritage pig,
Oh, okay.
just big, gentle pigs that are incredibly efficient on pasture. They've got a sweet demeanor too. You don't have to worry about them biting you or being nasty. They're just a sweet tempered, delicious pig. And we're lucky in our valley. There's a lot of orchards, and we're able to get their culled fruit. So most of the summer and into the fall, we're feeding these pigs,
Oh, okay. Yes.
apples and peaches, all organic culled fruit from these big orchards. And as they're eating the fruit, they're also grazing on grass and alfalfa.
Very nice.
They're drinking spring water. And then come wintertime, when there isn't forage out and about to go find, we actually source organic barley, and we sprout it for them. So when they're not pastured and eating fruit, they're eating sprouted barley.
Oh, okay.
So they got it pretty good. And as far as poultry, we actually don't raise poultry for market. We don't sell chicken or turkey or eggs or anything. We've kind of gotten to the point where actually poultry is worth more alive than dead, because so we have turkeys, chickens, guinea fowl, ducks, and geese, and they're the janitors. They are the cleanup crew. They never get fenced in. We have no fences for our poultry.
Oh, yes.
We don't have a chicken coop. We don't have an indoor space for them. They all roost. A lot of them roost on our porch. Other ones roost in the trees. They're actually completely free range birds that roam the farm 100% free. They hatch out their own young, and they have their own pattern that they like to graze and cover the whole farm.
Oh, yes.
And because of them, you can go into my pig pen. You can go into that pig pen, and you will not find one piece of manure. And it's amazing, because the pigs, they're in there, and
Oh, yes.
they're eating and they're pooping, and the people will say you've got to worm pigs. We never worm our pigs, because the cycle of the parasites is broken. The chickens and the guinea fowl and the turkeys, they go in there every day. They scratch out all the pig manure. They find any parasites, and they also find fly larvae, and they clean up the pig pen every day perfectly, better than I could ever do. And it keeps our pigs so incredibly healthy.
Oh, yes.
You've never seen such healthy, vital pigs that have no parasites, and there's no flies. For how many pigs and cows we have on our farm, you'll get the occasional fly, but it's nothing like the population you'd expect.
Oh, yes.
So our poultry is much more, as I said, much more valuable alive than dead. Because once we wrap them up and put them in a package and sell a bird, it's not doing the job anymore.
Oh,
And
yes.
so
Yes.
we keep them as cleanup crew.
Oh, very good. Very good. Now, are you rotating your hogs through your lanes?
We are. So a little differently than the cattle. The cattle we move constantly all summer. We're moving
Okay.
them fast through that system and mob grazing those small alleys. Because those alleys in between the trees aren't big.
Okay. Yes.
So we set up an electric fence, they graze it down, and we move them. Whereas with the pigs, I'm using them more as like the nuclear bomb. We find areas of the farm that are really weedy and really distressed. Areas that have been overgrazed for a long time, and areas that look like crap. And we say we need to start over in this section. So I'll put all the pigs on that spot, and we'll graze it, and we'll let them root up all the weeds. They'll eat the roots of the plants, and they'll take it down to nothing. And then I move them, and I come through with a dryland pasture mix. It's got alfalfas and clover, drought tolerant perennial grasses, native grasses. I come behind the pigs and I reseed those areas after they've demolished the weeds. And that way, when it grows back in, it comes back in with a viable pasture that I can then put the cows on. So the pigs are more of the demolition crew
Oh, yes.
that we're using to rehabilitate areas of the farm that have gotten kind of out of control.
And I can see them excelling at that job. On your pasture mix, is that a commercially available mix you're using, or is it a mix you came up with?
It's actually a custom mix. I've used all kinds of generic dryland pasture mix. It's a very common term. And after using them and actually figuring out what species really thrive in my environment with as little rainfall as we get, I've kind of custom tailored my own mix. And in case you're wondering, it's got yellow sweet clover. It's got multiple varieties of alfalfa that are drought tolerant, deep rooted alfalfas, and then it's got just a long list of native and perennial grasses that have deep tap roots, form big matted root systems, and the kind of plants that are hard to kill. That's what I really go for.
Oh, yes. And when you go in to put that seed in, are you hand broadcasting it? How are you incorporating it into the soil?
On our small scale, we broadcast it by seed. Once we've moved the pigs off of an area, we'll go through by hand, spread the seed. Ideally, we do it in the wintertime
Oh, yes.
before a heavy snow.
Oh, okay.
And that way the snow falls, it settles on those seed heads, and it just really allows the seeds to choose when they want to break hibernation and germinate in the spring, because the seeds know better than we do, and every variety is different. So for a pasture mix, you've got all the different varieties. If you sow them all in May when it's raining, a lot of them will come right up, but some of them actually wanted to have started that process much earlier, and other ones don't need to be starting the process yet. So it's nice to give them the option to naturally germinate.
Very good. You mentioned on your hogs, you don't have to worm them. You don't have any problems with disease. Are you vaccinating or worming your cattle? Or are they pretty hands off as well?
They're hands off as well. We don't worm, we don't vaccinate, we don't give anything, because what we have found is if you graze cattle properly and you move them around regularly, they stay healthy. There's not much they need. And same thing with as I had mentioned with the pigs, how the poultry clean up the manure and keep the fly population down. It's the same with our cattle. And flies are a major vector for disease with cattle,
Oh,
whether it be pink eye or other diseases. A lot of that stuff can come over the fence from your neighbor with a fly that lands on your cow.
oh yes.
And so I adore our poultry and how they really just spend all day hunting flies, hunting down the vector of disease. So, no, we don't use any medications of any type, wormers, anything like that. I'm a strong believer that well-managed livestock don't need that at all.
Oh, yes. Yes. When do you have your cattle calve?
We're on a kind of a swing with it right now.
Okay.
We just switched bulls, and so I'm a little off program with some of my cows right now, but in general, we go for a spring calving. April and May seems to be a gentle time for them, and a wonderful time because then the calf has all summer to nurse on its mother while they're grazing. The milk is extremely nutritious, and the calves grow like weeds. We got a little bit thrown off this year with we also run a couple of dairy cows just for family milk cows.
Yes.
And normally we have them calve in the spring with the beef cows, and then we milk all summer, make all the butter we need, put it up for the winter. This this is kind of a weird season for us, switching bulls, and boy, our dairy cows calved late summer. So
Oh,
by now we would usually have them dried up and be taking a break,
oh, yes.
but our cows are in full milk right now,
Oh,
and so we've had to really adapt to that. And what we've actually settled on is we don't separate calves anyway. We're one of those dairies that keeps the calves with the mother. And so this winter, that's really been something that works in our favor, because some days we look out the window, we say, it looks cold out there. It looks really snowy.
yes.
We should probably, I don't really feel like milking today. And so all we do is just let the calves drink all the milk, and they're grateful for it, and we're grateful for it too.
Yes. Some of those days you look out, yeah, you're like, I think it may be better inside for a little while.
You bet.
You mentioned winter gets there and you're feeding hay. Are you harvesting hay on your place? Or are you buying hay?
Yeah, so we have two trains of thought on that, and for sure we have to buy quite a bit of hay to get our animals through the winter. We don't have enough acreage right now to make our own hay, although hay sovereignty is a major goal of
Oh,
ours.
yes.
Eventually, we're not
Yes.
there yet. It takes quite a bit to invest in hay grounds, hay machinery, all that. So
Oh,
right
yes,
now
it
we're
does.
buying hay for the winter. Uh, we're lucky to be able to source in our area good hay that's not sprayed, that's from well taken care of fields. So at least we know it's high quality hay, and it's going to keep our animals healthy. But we try to feed as little as possible, and we do that by leaving areas of the farm ungrazed during the summer. We let some areas of the farm really get a good amount of growth on it, and we let that grass just die standing, and we save it so that come this time of year, basically November, December, even into January, we can run the cows onto those sections of the farm and winter graze them on what's out there in the field standing. And we do that as long as we can. Inevitably, it runs out eventually, and
Yes.
then we're just feeding off the hay pile. And hay has a couple of different purposes. It's not just feed for the animals; it's also an input to the farm. It's something I spend money on to bring to the farm, but it as an input, it's also bringing in nutrients from off the farm onto the farm. And so we try to take full advantage of that. And so when we feed the cows hay, we just try to prioritize feeding them that hay in areas that need the fertility.
Oh, yes.
So it's more than one purpose. We're not just feeding the cows with it. We're also using it to beef up certain areas, create a mat of hay and manure over areas of the farm that are weedy. And just as long as I'm going to spend money on hay, I want to get the most out of it we can.
True, true. Yes. Where do you see your farm going in the future? What's your plans for it?
Well, we see a few different ways it could really go. What I'd like to see is our farm really link up with more of the farms in our valley, in somewhat of a joint effort to get food from where we live out to the public, because we live in an area of Colorado on the western slope. It's quite remote, and it's also, in general, the people who live in my area aren't the type of people who want to go spend a bunch of money on grass-fed beef and pay a premium for that, because they either raise their own beef or they'd rather buy the cheap stuff at City Market.
Yes.
And so what I found is, my main customer base is not where I live. It's I drive meat to the Denver Boulder area on the Front Range. I drive meat as far as San Diego and Los Angeles. I drive meat all over the place, and myself, that demand keeps growing. The orders keep getting bigger. I can only keep up with that so much on my small acreage. And so it can go two ways. I can either grow our farm to meet those needs and just continue to acquire more land and grow my herd, or I can incentivize other farmers in my area to meet a certain to meet certain practices, to meet for lack of a better word, regulations of grass-fed, rotationally grazed,
Yes.
no GMOs, no shots, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
Get them on the same page so that their product is just as high quality as what we produce. And that way, we don't have to take the whole burden of producing enough for that market. We can actually support other farmers in our area and incentivize them to use a method of farming that's much better for our valley. So, and that's what I'd really like to see, is somehow the opportunity to team up with other farms where I live. And the ball is already rolling. There's people who are, tuning into this and getting on board, but basically create a system that creates an outlet for our products where we live, where we get top dollar, we get a premium for such an incredible product, a regenerative product, a product that's, not just carbon neutral, but actually taking carbon out of the air.
Yes.
So, and then getting it to the people who appreciate it and want to spend the money on that. So, I think as far as a business model goes, that's kind of the direction we're leaning right now.
Very good. I wish you luck in that. I think more and more people are looking at these regenerative practices and seeing how they can be incorporated. And the locally sourced beef market has just gone crazy through this pandemic. So hopefully that continues on. I think it's important people know where their food comes from.
That's for sure. Yeah, the pandemic has actually, it's been hard for a lot of people, but for us small farmers, it's been absolutely the best business year we've ever had.
Oh, yes.
We've never sold so much beef or pork, and we've never seen such an increase in customers. It's been a huge year for us. People actually caring about their food for the first time.
Which is great. I mean, a lot of bad things with the pandemic, but there's been some good points too, just like with everything else. Jake, we're at the time of our podcast for our famous four. It's our questions we ask of every guest on our podcast. Our first question is, what's your favorite grazing grass related book or resource?
Easy. Hands down, Restoration Agriculture, Mark Shepard. It's such a great book because it takes a lot of there's a lot of permaculture techniques and regenerative techniques that I feel like are mystical or difficult to understand for somebody who's a novice. And Mark does an amazing job of deciphering a lot of material and reformatting in a way that's actually very easy to understand, easy to look at the way he's written it and say, oh, that makes sense. It's not too technical. It's not too crazy. It's just, it's a wonderful case for regenerative farming. It's a wonderful case for livestock management and perennial farming. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that book. And that's one I'd recommend to anybody who wants to learn more about this.
Very good. I am not familiar with that book, so that's one I'll be adding to my to read list. What tool could you not live without on your farm?
Well, there's a lot of tools I couldn't live without, but I think the most important tool for us these past 4 years is the one that it's going to make me live longer, and that's my Bobcat T250. It's a skid steer track
Oh,
machine,
yes.
and it does all the heavy lifting for me.
Oh, very good.
Not only does it feed my cows, I use big bales, and I use my Bobcat to feed those big bales in the winter. I use it to feed big totes of barley to my pigs. I used it to cut all those swales on my farm and dig ponds. So even though I could have done all that by hand, boy, my
Oh,
back
yes.
really appreciates that machine, and it's going to help me to be a farmer for much longer. So I think that if you're going to take on a big regenerative project, a big land project, a big farming project, you got to have a machine that's going to do the heavy lifting for you, so that you can do it the rest of your life and not be in pain.
So true, yes. And as you age, you find those pain points a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell someone just starting out on this journey to be a grass farmer?
My number one recommendation to somebody getting into this now is to find a mentor. Find many mentors. Go work on their farms. Immerse. It's like learning a language. Immerse yourself in it, and don't be distracted by anything else. And that includes, no offense for what you're doing, but that includes all these other things like podcasts and books for a little while, not for the whole time, but for a period of time, not to listen to what everybody has to say, but just to go have your own experience on a farm. Take your headphones off,
Yes.
put your phone away somewhere where you can't find it. Find a mentor, find a farm that you really appreciate the way that they work the land, the way they take care of their animals, and immerse yourself in it. And don't be distracted by anything else for as long as possible. And when you leave that place, you'll have the confidence and the skills to go do it on your own.
Yes, you're gaining that experience from someone who knows how to do it, who's successful. Yeah, a lot of benefit there. Now, I encourage everyone to continue listening to this podcast, but yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Well, they should come back to it, but take a break.
Yeah, okay,
Just a
yeah.
short break.
Yeah, they should. Take a break, then come back. Yeah. Where can others find out more about you?
We have a presence on Instagram uh, under Cedar Springs Farm. We try to keep it as educational of a page as possible when it's not just a dump for pictures of my cute baby. We try to make it all about our farming practices and how we manage our animals and trees. There's also a YouTube video right now that Stefano Creatini made it, and it's basically a tour around our farm.
Oh, very nice.
And if you search my name, Jake Takiff, on YouTube, it will come up, and it's about, I think it's 35, 40 minutes of just a full-on tour of our systems and of our farm.
Very nice.
So that's another place you can kind of learn more about what we're doing.
We'll post links to Instagram and to that YouTube video in our show notes. Well, Jake, we appreciate you coming on today. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I enjoyed it too, and thanks for thinking to, interview us and see what we're doing over there in Hotchkiss.
It is always great to find out what others are doing, what's working for them. I've been to too many conferences where they tell us what to do. I want to hear what people are doing.
That's the truth.
I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Jake as much as I have. But did I forget to ask the question you wanted to ask? Now is the chance for you to ask your question. Go to the grazinggrass.com website and click on Ask Your Question. Complete the form, and we will have a future episode where our guests are answering your questions. You just listened to the Grazing Grass podcast. helping grass farmers learn from grass farmers. We encourage you to subscribe to our podcast, share our episodes with others, and leave us a review where you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep grazing grass.